Welcome back. Namibia has seen a dramatic rise in the import of vapes and hookah tobacco, over $1.4 million Namibian worth spent in just the last 4 years, according to the latest statistics by the NSA. Now, a student-led group is taking its stance against this practice and initiated a campaign, #LosDieChoef, a Gen Z call to ditch vape culture and redirect focus towards building a healthier future. Tonight we're joined by spokesperson Jessie Abraham from the Namibia National Students Organization, NANSO, to talk to us about their campaign, the risks of vaping among young people, and why they believe change is needed. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I had to ask what choef is. That's how old I am. I didn't quite know. So I think this campaign will alert both young and old at the same time. But talk to us. Of course, I mentioned in the intro the statistics and so on. But what prompted you guys as NANSO to say we've got to launch this campaign? You know, specifically targeting the use of vaping and you know, this hookah culture amongst young people.
Just as you mentioned now, choef is is a very common word amongst young people, but not amongst the older generation, for instance. So even the naming itself was very intentional, not just to speak the language of the young people, but to alert their guardians of what the terminology is nowadays. And we've actually received a lot of feedback from the older generation or young parents who are saying, I actually now can identify when my child is referring to something, or when they're engaging with their friends and they're talking about these things, and I'm able to identify. But back to your question, the #LosDieChoef campaign stemmed from particularly the work we do as NANSO. Every beginning of the year, mid-year, and at the end of the year, we assess schools. So we go to visit our basic education warriors. And while we are doing these campaigns, it's very often that, or it has become very often that our principals, for instance, alert us that, you know, the rise in the usage of vapes or dangerous and harmful e-cigarettes has risen at a particular school, for instance. We have had cases where our young people are now opening the vapes, inserting harmful drugs like marijuana, for instance, and they're smoking on the school premises. So because of the effects of marijuana, obviously, neurotypically, it definitely disturbs the learning environment. So the principals and the school managements have definitely engaged us to say, you guys need to do something. It is disturbing our critical learning time, and the young people are distracted. Even just not that, it's on the rise and it's affecting more schools in the district, for instance.
What was the response to the launch of this hashtag on social media? Was there a lot of interaction from young people, because you wanted to catch their attention, and so did you?
We definitely did, both good and bad, but I think it was expected. The good, because we know there are people who also don't like it, particularly those that have maybe already experienced the negative effects of it, or that have a close relative or friend who have experienced the negative effects of the vape. The bad, because I think it's still in the it's a premature phase, and we are yet to slowly but surely introduce the campaign in its essence. I think leading on to the campaign and up to now, a lot of the jargon or the negative jargon surrounding the campaign is that, you know, it's my body, it's my choice, it's, you know, people do have human rights. But I think for us, it's now our task as NANSO to educate exactly what the crux of the campaign is. And it's not a calling out, but a calling in, and that we're actually starting the conversation.
How did vaping become so popular amongst young people?
It shocks me every time, but thinking back from my high school days, I think it started around COVID, I would say. That's when vaping culture really took off. It used to be very rare. If I saw someone with a vape, it would be 1 in 10 people. Now it's 3 in 10 people or 4 in 10 people. But vaping culture essentially emanated from, and as a youth demographic, there are still levels within that youth demographic. So I would say youth, or vaping culture rather, started with the demographic of youth that fall between the ages of 16 and 25. And over time, it has now influenced the younger demographic, which is why it has infiltrated our schools so heavily.
What do you say to those who say that vaping is, a healthy alternative to cigarettes?
It is not. Science has proven. We are fortunate enough, and I like to make use of other countries, what their statistics say, on just the research alone, scratching away their population's number. Just the research alone has proven that even 1 vape, for instance, is equal to 50 cigarettes. And historically, if we look at the history of cigarettes, in the 18th century, for instance, when they were first upcoming, doctors, for instance, used to prescribe cigarettes. You have a headache, smoke a cigarette. You're feeling nauseous, smoke a cigarette. And now, years down the line, we actually see that cigarettes actually cause respiratory illnesses that lead to chronic illnesses. So ours is really just before we get to those 50 years, when people actually start realizing that vapes are bad, how can we get the conversation started now? Because we've realized that with young people, it's almost as if there's a cognitive dissonance. They know it's wrong, but they still do it. Some know it is wrong and still do it.
You said earlier that this is part of what NANSO does, and you know, principals of certain schools have reached out to you and said, please come and have a chat with these young people because we're seeing this issue here. But are they doing enough? Is that enough? And if not, what more can they do to address this vaping culture?
I am actually happy that a few schools have such, I would call them old school principals, disciplinarians, I would like to call them, not in the physical sense because it's not allowed anymore, but in the oral sense, instilling discipline as well. I think it's definitely something that needs to be formalized because it's only at a few schools where you get to really see what measures are in place to address the vape culture. Some principals in their code of conduct, for instance, they stipulate if you are caught with one, you are off from school for 3 weeks. You know, and sometimes we as NANSO get called on by the parents and say, no, the child cannot be away from school, you're denying the child access to education. But then this is where we also have to think from the perspective of the educator that you cannot at any point educate someone who isn't in a state because of vapes, for instance, to be educated properly. It's not a conducive environment. So I think from our perspective, what needs to be done more, aside from the campaign, obviously, and it is an online campaign, I think schools should really formalize the way they treat incidents with vape specifically, vapes and drug abuse, for instance.
Should government policies, you know, get involved in this conversation and in terms of taking action, you know, such as the upcoming Tobacco Act amendment? Should it you know, address, you know, the vaping culture and, of course, you know, helping to curb youth from vaping?
Definitely. I think if we look at our statistics as a country, Her Excellency the President, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, likes to say we are too few to be poor. And I think as NANSO, we have definitely taken a stance that we are too few to have such a multi-million-dollar industry invested in by our people. Where is the money coming from? If you look at the prices of vapes, it's very suspicious to think that it's a multi-million-dollar industry and our economy is developing in such a way that we need to invest properly. So I think down the line, government must definitely look into especially restrictions. It's too easy for our minors especially to access a vape. It's readily accessible. In the shop, a minor can go buy a vape and with no questions asked. So I think for starters, our government must definitely look into restrictions about who can access it, if not at all.
It's 1.4 billion Namibian dollars, almost impossible to live over the span of 4 years.
Definitely.
If you had access to these funds, how would NANSO invest in Namibia's future?
As the champions of education, definitely, we are starting there. But I think it's also very important for young people, and that's why we wanted the conversation to start, the role young people themselves play in how their priorities are matched in government. The other day when we had a discussion on the national budget, the same way we said, we are bringing you guys here because we want you guys to understand the budget, and it's too important to have a budget only understood by politicians and, for instance, the legislative branch. Everyone needs to understand the budget, and I think equally same, young people need to understand that we will live, especially us as the future working class, we will live the longest with the consequences of what we do now. And I think vaping might seem small, and that's why it was also important for us to bring on this campaign, and we have seen the commentary on, is that the only big issue we have going on? You know, it's always expected. But I think what is important is we don't realize what the social ills are until they actually become too extensive. So definitely, for us as NANSO, it was very important to bring this campaign on because we want young people to realize that even though not directly, we do shape the trajectory in which we evolve. Are we going to be a working class that vapes in board meetings? Or are we going to be a working class that is conducive, that is... Because you have to realize that...
you know, back in the 80s, they used to smoke in the aeroplanes. It still blows my mind till this day.
It's very shocking. And I see my peers who do smoke vape, and it's almost second nature to them. Sometimes they do it without realizing. You're having a conversation and someone will blow strawberry air into your face. So I'm really just concerned in that regard, if we are losing, as the upcoming working class, if we are losing decorum when it comes to the workspace, and how we are going to groom ourselves to be the future adults, essentially.
Really brilliant points you make there. You mentioned the crux of the campaign. So talk to us about what, sort of initiatives and you're going to roll out to further this hashtag Lost to Truth.
I think it has been very evident that we want to speak to the young people in light of the name of the campaign in itself. But because NANSO has structures in all 14 regions, we want to utilize them fully. We understand that vaping culture is not the same in all 4 corners of Namibia. So we definitely want to adjust and tailor-make it. For instance, Commerce region accommodates a lot of other people from other regions.
Yes.
So we want to tailor-make it to where it's more congested. We also want to tailor-make it to where it's not as congested, but it might be upcoming, so we don't have to ignore it, and we can't ignore it. So definitely we are making use of our regional structures to tailor-make it. In Omaheke regions, in the Omaheke region, for instance, are there kids who vape? What is the extent for it? Is it readily available in a shop? Fortunately and unfortunately, for instance, if we look at a town that doesn't have too many chains of supermarkets, it's less accessible.
Yeah.
So we have to look at the accessibility aspect as well. So that's where we are going back to the drawing board and looking at the statistics, for instance, and utilizing our structures in all 14 regions to say, what is it like in your region?
Yeah.
For Commerce, we are well aware because for most of us in NANSO, or the National Executive Committee rather, we are based in Commerce, so we get firsthand how it feels like to be in a congested region that has constant vape culture. But now it is now our task to engage our colleagues from the Zambezi region to see how is it like that side, so we can help you so you don't reach the stage where we are right now.
I think starting with an age restriction on who's able to purchase these vapes and hookah tobacco would be a great start.
Definitely.
Yeah. Jessie, thank you so much for being here this evening. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that was Jessie from NANSO speaking to us there about their recently launched campaign, hashtag Los de Chuf. And of course, if you'd like to find out more about what it entails, you can go on to their social media pages to get more information on that. On that note, we wrap up today's edition of the Daily Roundup. We're back tomorrow, same time and place. Thank you for watching. Good night.